1985. This is Joe Todd, and an interview with Mr. Kenneth Phillips. Mr. Phillips, where were you born?
I was born here in Woodward County, April 26, 1918.
Who's your father?
Samuel T. Phillips.
Where is he from?
Missouri. Lynn County, Missouri, if that means.
Okay. And your mother?
My mother's from Denver, Missouri. Both from Missouri.
And what was her full name? Her maiden?
Gross. Nellie Gross.
Gross.
G-R-O-C-E.
Okay. What kind of work did your father do?
He was farmer rancher. Mostly ranching more than farming. So my father came down here and homesteaded in '92. My mother came down here in '97, and she was single and she homesteaded. She was 21 and she homesteaded. My mother and dad both homesteaded.
Did they make the run?
No, Al, see this part out here, this outlet, wasn't run like it was over here on Enid. See, this was a run. They turned this loose, and it wasn't actually a run. They just kind of said, they took this away from the Indians and just said anybody can homestead it. Okay. And they turned it loose in '92. And my dad came down here and homesteaded southwest of Sharon. And then my mother homesteaded a mile west of Sharon, where she...
Did she come down by herself? Your mother?
No, she came down with her mother and father. They homesteaded. My grandparents homesteaded.
Okay.
Both of my grandparents on the Phillips side. My dad came down first, and then his mother and dad came down. And my dad sold his homestead to his mother and dad and bought another place. Then on my mother came down with her mother and father.
Were any of your grandparents in the Civil War?
See, I've got grandparents and great-grandparents here that all came down. And my great-grandfather, which is buried south of Sharon down here, he was in the Civil War. But not knowing anything about it, I don't.
What was his name?
Phillips.
Phillips.
Silas Phillips.
Silas Phillips.
Mm-hmm. But now, as far as knowing anything about that part of the history, I sure don't.
Which side was he on, north or south?
You know that I don't know.
Yeah.
I remember my granddad talking about the Civil War, the carpetbaggers, and all of this. Old guys that didn't want to go in and fight for the country, they run around over the country and stole cattle. And I heard him tell about back there in Missouri. Actually, they were from Indiana, is where my grandfather came from. Came from Indiana to Missouri. Mm-hmm. But I heard him tell about a lot of the men were going fighting the war, and just the women and children, they'd just come in and take the horses and the cattle or anything they needed to. But you know, when we were kids, we didn't pay much attention to that. Right. You know, what didn't interest us. Mm-hmm. Now we'd like to know that. Yeah. Would be.
That's why we had this program.
That's right. Now that's why I was telling Wayne a while ago, this camera, he's 90-some years old here, and he's sharp. And we'll try to get him out. If you're going to be here, I'll have to do some calling. Now he's blind.
Is that Albert Cameron?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked to him.
Oh, good deal. I'll tell you, see, he goes back.
I'll interview him again. You know, we do.
Now I had a man, I called him I got home this morning. He's up close to 90, I'd say. And he was a World War I veteran. And I talked to his daughter and said, well, she'd try to bring him out today. And I hope you're going to stay longer than one day.
Oh, yeah.
We can, well, I told George a while ago, I said, heck, we can fill you up, you know, keep you busy for 2 or 3 days, I'm sure, other people here.
As a small boy, what chores did you do in the farm?
Usually, I'd bring in the wood, always had one or two horses to feed. And that would be my chores usually night and morning, or, you know, when I was younger. Then when, you know, of course, you get a little older, why, you start milking cows and maybe working in the field and stuff like that.
I was going to ask, did your parents ever talk about the trip to Oklahoma from Missouri?
Son, my mother came down on the railroad. See, the Santa Fe was through Woodward. We went through in 80 something. The Santa Fe went through Woodward. So all when they got on, they just got in, I suppose, box cars or something. And I remember my grandparents telling me they brought horses, and don't remember any cows. They brought their horses and machinery and their furniture and put it all in a box car, and then one man or two rode back there to feed and water, and then the rest of them, I think, rode possibly.
I've heard those called immigrant cars.
Yeah, immigrant cars. Well, that's the way my dad and both sides of the family, my grandparents, that's what they came down here in. Immigrant cars, yeah, immigrant cars.
When did you start school?
Indian Creek, out in the country, out in the rural.
One room?
Two-room school.
How many kids were going there?
Oh, 15, possibly, somewhere in that. And we had the first 8th grade, that school, 1 through 8.
Mm-hmm. So we had, what, 2 teachers then?
One teacher taught all grades.
How does one teacher teach 8 grades?
I wondered about that. I don't imagine it was very easy, but being in a 2-room school, she'd usually have each grade that she was teaching in this other room, and then the balance of them would be over here where they could study and whatever they was doing, where it didn't interfere too much with the other.
I was going to ask, when your parents homesteaded here, what kind of houses did they live in?
The first thing my dad used was a tent, and then he made what he called a half dugout, half below the ground, half above the ground. My dad run a sawmill back in Missouri, so when he came down, he had a carload of lumber set down so that he'd have something to take down there on his claim. And he made a half dugout. He lived in it till, I don't know how long now. But I'm saying like 5, 6 years. And then he got enough lumber down here and started him a little old, I think maybe two-room house.
You ever talk about the inside of the dugout?
Only thing I heard him saying was they just had a dirt floor that the snakes and the lizards and the spiders and everything else moved in with, living in that in that dirt. Why, he said you had everything, and it had a sod roof on it. And he said, boy, everything moved in with you.
What about the tent? How long did he live in the tent before he moved in the sod?
Oh, I don't suppose too long till he got this dugout made. I imagine probably maybe a summer. Then he got this dugout.
You do any plowing on the farm?
Yes.
How many acres did you plow in one day with a walking plow?
Oh, they didn't. I don't know. I don't suppose too much. 2 or 3 acres a day, probably with that one. I never done any of it much myself. Now, until I come along just about. I used to do some, but not too much. Now, I heard my dad talk about when they were breaking sod in this country in the early days. But now, as far as saying how much they did a day, why?
What were the major crops you raised?
I think corn and Capricorn, and say like maize, that was their crops to feed their horses and cattle.
How many cash crops?
Corn.
Corn.
I heard my dad talk about having they haul corn from down Sharon here to Woodward. Now they'd sell mostly just straight corn, and I think then later they started with like wheat after corn. Now the wheat was probably one of the biggest cash crops they had.
They did. What about wheat harvest? Do they have combines, and do they have the header bar?
No, my dad started out with just a header. I remember when I was a kid, they had 6 horses on a header, and had header barges that they elevate the wheat up in and go stack it. And
how many men on a harvest crew?
well, I don't know, because I never was on one, but I'd say it'd take probably 8 to 10 to stack into the everything in the run. They run 2 barges, and they was 2 to a barge. 2, 4, 5. Yeah, 8 to 10, I'd say would make up a harvest crew.
Yeah. And did you go through high school there?
No, I started to Sharon High School. Went 1 year and quit.
And what year was that?
Oh boy, see, I graduated in 30. Let's see, I think. I graduated from the 8th grade in 35, I believe. Then I went 36 and part of 37 when I quit.
In 1935, 8th grade. Tell me about Black Sunday.
Oh, I can remember it real well. I remember I was just more or less just a kid, you might say. But now where I lived, we didn't have much dirt blowing. Most of our dirt moved in here from Colorado, Kansas, or West Texas. But it could just be a day like today, just a nice sunny day, and all of a sudden them clouds would come in out of that northwest, and by noon you could not, it was just like the middle of the night.
That was Black Sunday?
Yes, they'd move in and you couldn't breathe. I remember we'd take and use a lot of wet sheets and towels and things to try to keep over the doors and windows to keep some of that dust, but it'd get in on the floor, half-inch thick, maybe in a matter of a couple hours. That'd just drift in. And out in here, the wind didn't blow so much. This dirt would just come in here and just settle in. In fact, it wasn't dirt blowing from around here. Most of it was Colorado, western Kansas and Colorado dirt. It came in.
Where'd Black Sunday come from?
You mean the naming it that?
Well, the dirt.
Well, like I say, most of it come out of Kansas and Colorado.
Because I understand that was black dirt.
Well, it wasn't. It was black. Well, I called it more of a brown. Brown to red more than black.
Yeah.
Now, where I think a lot of that black come from was it just due away to their sun, and it just looked like the middle of the night.
What did the dust storm look like when it was approaching?
Well, you just see them moving in, kind of like you would a clouds, if you just see fog or something. Well, that's the way they moved in. Maybe there wouldn't be hardly no wind at all. But then usually as they moved in, the wind picked up with them. And sometimes it'd get worse. It'd start out, then the wind would increase, and they'd just keep.
I heard that there's always birds and everything flying in front of these dust storms.
I don't remember that. Sure don't. Not. No, I don't recall that. I sure don't. No, don't recall the birds moving. I imagine they did. That sounds logical.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing.
How did the Depression affect you and your family? 1930s.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how my dad ever done it. There was 6 of us kids, and to feed us and clothe us. And my dad always, we never was short of food. Now, we a lot of times didn't have many clothes to wear. Always had plenty to eat. Maybe it wasn't what you wanted, but my dad kept, but I'll tell you, it was rough. You didn't know money. Nobody had any money then. Back in the 20s and 30s, why, money was just that was just kind of an afterthought. You just didn't have much money.
Did all the neighbors help each other pretty good?
You bet, real good.
Yeah. We were talking about butchering, Mr. Webb and I were. And all the neighbors got together and they'd butcher.
Now we butcher 8 or 10 pigs at a time. All jump in and help.
This is in what, October?
Oh, usually it was later than that. It was in, wait till it started freezing, so your meat would stay.
Yeah.
It'd be, yeah, maybe October, November, long in after the cool weather.
How do you cure the pork?
Well, they usually used, my dad made his own out of saltpeter and pepper and black pepper, and I don't remember, he just mixed his own. And we had one building that we used just for that, and they'd lay this meat out the side to cure the bacon and the hams. Just lay it out and they'd just cover that with salt and then turn it over and get both sides, and then they'd some used liquid smoke, but if they didn't buy it already made, they made their own and cured the ham and bacon, and then like when they made their sausage.
Yeah. What is liquid smoke?
It's just kind of like what you'd call now a barbecue, a type of barbecue.
Yeah.
And they would inject that. They had needles, and they would put that in the bone, right down the bone of the ham to cure that inside of that ham. And they would put that in there now the bacon was usually just done with regular cure salt and stuff like that.
Okay. 1941, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. What were you doing?
I was here in Woodward. As a young man, just running around, but I had a car that had a radio in it, and I don't remember around 1 to get the time, which would have been, but that's when we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and it was and one of the boys that was with me had just got back from Randolphville, Texas. He was in the Army. But he had went in and then he had got out. So I know he told me, get me to the, back there then you had nothing but telegraph. And so he went down to the telegraph office, sent a wire to him that he was ready to go when they needed him. He wanted to tell him where he was at. He was available.
When did you enlist?
I went in January of 42 at Fort Sill.
Where'd you take basic training?
San Diego, California. Camp Callan, California.
What was basic training like?
Well, it was quite a change for this old farm boy, I'll tell you for sure. Which I never did mind. It was, I was used to getting up at 5:30 anyway out on the farm, so that part didn't bother me. a lot of infantry drill. That was your basic learning military courtesy. But a lot of walking. That was usually the basic part of basic training. Now, it wasn't easy, but I never did mind it too. It didn't work that hard.
What kind of weapon did you drill with?
I started out with 03 Springfield.
Springfield 03.
03 was our weapon. The M1s that came out, but they didn't give them to us for any basic training. We used the 03s on our basic.
After basic, where'd you go?
Went from San Diego to San Francisco and picked the boat up, and I had 6 weeks of basic. And went to San Diego and shipped out and went to Hawaii. I remember going into Pearl. We'd heard about all of this war, but boy, when I seen all them ships bottom side up, and the Oklahoman and the Arizona, it was quite a shock, I'll tell you, to see the mess that was in.
What did they look like?
It's hard to explain. Everything where they bombed all those buildings and strafed them, and it was just practically beyond words of telling anyone what it was like. And of course, when I got over there, let's see, I went in January. I went over there in March of 42, and I got over at Pearl. And it was still real, what I'd call just mass confusion. Still was. It was just, they kept thinking, well, the Japs are going to come back, and it was really, I was in an artillery outfit, and so they were needing to set up on these airstrips, and that's what I went doing. I went over on the windward side of the island and was stationed on a naval airstrip.
What was your duties there?
I was a machine gunner, 50 caliber machine gun.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, the first time I was there a year. Then I went out on the task force, went down to New Guinea, and I was gone a year down there on this task. Then I came back to Hawaii.
What were your duties in the task force? What'd you do?
Well, I went as a aerial gunner, machine gunner, anti-aircraft. I was in an anti-aircraft. We went down to the Gilberts. I was down in the Gilberts. It was at, we had power outfit on Macon, Apamama, Tarawa. And it was about the 3 islands that my company was actually based. We kind of had to split up different.
Did you come in contact with the Japanese?
There was some still there, not too many. See, the Marines pushed us. They went in, the Marines went in ahead of us, and we'd come in behind because, see, we weren't infantry, we were artillery, so you couldn't land under fire, or that is, we'd come in, you'd have sniper fire, but you didn't have to. We had to have a beachhead to get those weapons on. Those artillery guns were, you're talking about weighing 3 or 4 tons, see? So you had to have a place. So what they would do, like us, all of us machine gunners, we went in first, and then we got a place established and got set up to where we could shoot horizontal fire or vertical fire, either one, see? Because the Japanese were still sending some planes in, see, bombing where we were at. And so we'd go ahead and get a beachhead, and then they would bring the artillery pieces in, and we'd get them set up in kind of a battery area, but with the machine guns all around the perimeter of it.
Then you got back to Hawaii.
Do what?
Then you went back to Hawaii?
Yes, I was down there a year, and we all thought we was going back to San Francisco, but it turned out to be Pearl again.
And what did you do the second time at Pearl?
Well, I was still with an artillery outfit. We moved on West Lock of Pearl. That's where I was stationed when I came back. And we was out in a pineapple field, or sugar cane and pineapple along in there. We was out in a field. We had our anti-aircraft on the west side of Pearl Harbor, what they call West Lock of Pearl. And I was there till I came back on discharge. Well, I didn't come back on discharge. Actually, I had been overseas 41, 42 months. And they come around and said, all you boys that's been over this long, we're going to send you back on R&R. So I said, man, that's great. I didn't care how I got back. Well, I came into San Francisco on R&R papers. And as soon as I got there, the captain checked all my papers, and he said, we're discharging men with a lot less points than you had. See, I had a lot. You get so many points. You probably know you're in combat so much a month. And well, I'd been over 42 months, so I had a lot of points. So he just scratched out R&R and put on their process for discharge. So I took my discharge.
And when was that?
That was in October of 45.
So that's after the war was over then?
Yeah.
Okay. What was your reaction when you heard about the atomic bomb?
I thought it was great. We was out on a gunnery range when they brought out a paper, evening paper. That's the first I'd heard. We hadn't heard nothing to the Army about it. And explaining they had dropped the bomb, and boy, it sounded great to me because I knew it wouldn't be long we'd be on our way home.
Did everybody believe it really existed, or?
Well, it's like
it's
everything else. You had to kind of believe what they told you, and whatever. Then they told us they dropped this and this and that. You had to believe it, or it was easy to kind of daydream anyway. And
yeah.
We wanted to get it over with, but still, it was something else.
Were you at Pearl on VJ Day?
Yes, it was.
Tell me about VJ Day at Pearl.
Well, I was in town. I was in Honolulu, and I'd been there long enough that I had got acquainted. And the girl I was going with, I happened to be down to her place when it came over and she had a car. And I remember we thought we'd go uptown Honolulu to see what's going on. And you cannot believe it. They had trolleys in Honolulu that run. They were electric trolleys, but instead of having tracks, they looked just like a bus, rubber-tired bus, but they run electric. Oh boy, all those Navy and Army boys, as soon as they heard this, some of them had a rope on these little pulleys. So they had they'd get up on the back of that bus, pull that little rope and move that wheel off of that trolley line. And well, it wasn't long till all the cars and thousands of people, see, it was just mass. And the old bus driver, if he got around behind to put the wheel up on the trolley, time he got back around, somebody had pulled it off again. So it was just, everything was at a standstill. I know we stopped, I found a place to park this girl's car, and we were probably something like 10 blocks from downtown Honolulu. And, oh, you've never seen anything of all the hugging and the kissing and everybody was bubbling over. That was a pretty big day. And I know this girl I was with, she'd be by me and somebody'd grab her. You know, Navy, Army, just everybody was just in a, but it was a great time. It really was. Great day.
After you were discharged, what'd you do?
I came back here to Woodward, and my dad was getting up in age, and so he sold out. That was, let's see, I bought out in 46. 46, I bought my dad out on the farm.
And how far from Woodward is the farm?
8 miles southeast of Woodward.
Next question, the tornado, 47.
I was caught in this tornado right out by this underpass. My in-laws lived north of Tangier. I lived down here. And when this tornado came through Woodward, it got so dark, and I told my wife, I said, we ought to go home. I said, it's looking pretty stormy. I got out here to this underpass, and my car wouldn't run. Well, I didn't know what the problem. I didn't know, see, the tornado was coming through Woodward. I was just, and so my wife and I was driving along, and all of a sudden my car got to missing and a banging. So I went around and raised the hood, and all of the plugs were trying to fire, just like we were trying to fire at the same time. Well, I was in this dead calm, see, but I didn't know what it was. I heard all this roar.
You said all your plugs are firing at the same time?
Yes. See, and I didn't know it was that electrical part in the air. Well, I heard all this roar, but I'm a half a mile of the railroad track. I'm north of the Santa Fe. So I hear all this, and my wife said, can't figure all this noise, all this roar. And so I said, well, you know, we're north of the tracks. And it was dark. Couldn't, and about the time, but when I got out of the car, I couldn't hardly breathe. And I said to her, I don't know what's wrong. I said, I can't hardly, either one of us couldn't hardly get enough air to breathe. Well, I checked my car, and it just wouldn't run. Well, we could hear all this noise, but we still didn't know what was going on. Well, pretty soon I started the car, and it just took right off. So up the road we come, and just as I get into the west side of Woodward, I run into all these telephone wires. Well, I couldn't see them in my lights till I was up in them. And I told my wife, I said, well, something has really went through. But we still didn't know what it was. Well, I got around, I had to get off of the highway to get around all these wires. And I got down to where the highway turns to come into Woodward. The lightning kind of flashed, and I knew there'd been a 2-story house on that corner because I knew the people who lived there. And when that lightning, my wife said, boy, there's nothing there. And I said, oh boy, they've had a bad storm. So we come on through into Woodward. I got just on top of the hill, and a guy flagged me down with a flashlight, and he run the motel there, and he said, I wonder if you could, and I was the first car into Woodward from the west, because all the roads were full, you couldn't get into Woodward. And he said, I've got a lady bleeding real bad. So I went with him, and I got this lady in my car in the back, and I said, I'll take her to the hospital. I started, and I didn't get but 2 blocks. And the streets were full of houses, And people were, they'd seen the lights of my car, and here they'd come and they'd just run right into my car. They were, in shock. Well, this lady was bleeding. I had a tourniquet on her one arm, and I had my wife back there to release it so her limb wouldn't die. Got down there, and I told my wife, I said, there's no way I can get through there. Well, I take the lady back up to the motel, and I put her in a bed, and I left her with my wife, stayed with her. And I drove back down and took off a foot, and finally got through. I had to go probably 5 blocks through all these houses and stuff. Well, I finally got over and found some people that had come in and told them I was needing an ambulance. But I couldn't get we couldn't get no ambulance through all them streets. And so finally, I went back up and I got the lady and put her back in my car. And my wife and I took her down, and I carried her about 3-4 blocks through there and got her over to where a man had a pickup. And we loaded her in the pickup, and we had 2 or 3 more in there and took off the hospital. Well, I go back up, my wife and I did, and we got back to this motel, and he said it had just tucked the roof off of the motel right at the square, and it had sucked a baby out of there had been a baby in this one room, I suppose small baby, but it had just sucked it right up out of this crib. And so this woman was, of course, real frantic, looking for a baby. And so I stayed up there, of course, being dark, you can't. And then it started raining, which didn't help. All I had was a little old 2-cell flashlight running around there, trying to help people. And they had gone through it, and I had, you know what I mean? And they were just clear out of their minds. I run on to a friend of mine. Him and another guy was carrying this guy. They just had him by the arms, just kind of dragging him. And I shined the flashlight down there, and I seen he was dead. And I said, Bill, you just lay him down. And they never paid no attention. They just went dragging him. They was kind of going down the gutter of the street, and they never even heard me. They had gone through all that. And it made it where my wife and I hadn't gone through that. But other people, you just can't imagine the shock, they was in. This one friend of mine had lost his mother and dad and some of his family. And boy, when you see them, they was trying to get me to find them. Well, that's kind of hard to do when they're maybe, some of them we found the next day, 6 blocks, 8 blocks of where we had been that night. Because the next day I had a truck, so I brought my truck into town, and we gathered up people just like you was gathering up stove wood, They'd just drive along and they'd load on. They'd dig these people out of another house and they'd load right on. You go down and sometimes I might have 10 people, dead people that I'd picked up, and we'd take them to the morgue and load. Of course, the morgues were all full. They just had outside or in any empty building they could find that wasn't tore up. And no, it was quite a shock, I'll tell you.
How many were killed in that tornado?
I think 107, I believe. 107, somewhere in that neighborhood now.
How much of Woodward was destroyed?
Not a lot, mostly the west side. I'd say from, possibly a third, is about all. Got the west, the south kind of was going on an angle, but I'd say not much over a third of Woodward. somewhere in that. There was damage all over town, but not, that west side was just about like the top of this table. Just slick, just be footage sticking up, you know.
Did the government send in any relief?
Or you had, of course, you had your Red Cross moved in, Salvation Army, and then they sent, there was some boys came up from Fort Sill to patrol, keep down looting. They had probably, 50, 75 possibly came in and stayed 2 weeks, maybe a little longer, patrolling and traffic, keeping the traffic out of certain areas. They sent in quite a bit of help to.
How long did it take Woodward to recover from that tornado?
I think they're still recovering. Some people are. Some of the older people that went through it, they're still, I'd say, to get it anyway half back to normal, 5 years, at least 5. And that wasn't everything built back. I suppose it was a matter of 15 years getting houses back out in that part where it was.
What have you done since then? The farm?
I've done a little of everything. I traveled for a while. I traveled for a cattle company. When I first got back, I wasn't making a lot of money. I worked 10 years down here at Trigo's clothing store. Well, I say 10 years. I farmed and I'd help. But if I didn't, like in harvest time, I'd take off for 2 months during the summer. Then I'd work the balance of the year. Well, then finally in 40, it was in about 60, 61, I went and bought me some combines. So I started custom combine. I did that 15 years. Of course, I went in and farmed. My wife stayed home, and I had 2 children, and they'd run the ranch for me while I'd be gone. I'd take off in May and get back in September. And I'd done that for 15 years, and finally I quit that. And the rest of the time I've just been out there working.
Yeah. Did you do any work for the CCC or WPA?
No, never. That wasn't any of that.
Well, anything we haven't covered?
Not much. That's more than I'd figured on.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you.
Well, I was glad to help you.